This woman murdered a teenager because it was on her bucket list. It was 2016 and Gemma Lilly was 26 years old. She was obsessed with serial killers and she'd emigrated to Australia 6 years earlier back in 2010. She was originally from Lincolnshire and had a troubled upbringing. Her fascination with crime and horror was a dark one, and disturbingly, she even put murdering someone on her bucket list. Her housemate was 44-year-old Trudy Lennon. She was actually introduced by a mutual friend to Trudy. Trudy had been struggling financially and actually had 2 children to feed, so the pair decided to live together in order to share bills. At this point, the women started sharing disturbing fantasies about killing someone. Some of these were even documented in the online chats that the pair had. They used the code names SOS and Corvina. Within the space of just 3 weeks living together, the pair hatched a sickening plan. Terrifyingly, in the days leading up to the plan, the pair bought a circular saw, bleach, cement, a drop sheet, a large plastic barrel and some acetone. Trudy identified their victim. Aaron Page was friends with one of Trudy's sons and she decided they would lure him to the flat. They used the excuse of needing Aaron to come and install some games onto their computers. As he obliged, Gemma came up behind him and strangled him with a wire. She then stabbed him 3 times. They buried him in a shallow grave and attempted to cover it with concrete. Aaron was reported missing on the 14th of June after failing to return home. It was on the 20th of June that police were able to track Aaron's last call to Gemma's phone, which led them to investigate her. They searched the property and found Aaron's body along with the knife and the saw. Police even found CCTV evidence from Gemma's own CCTV camera. In 2018, both women were sentenced to life with a minimum term of 28 years. This man shot his colleague's boyfriend after she rejected him. 37-year-old Kevin Prasad worked with Thandar Singh at San Francisco International Airport. The pair had been working together for years and multiple times Kevin had asked Thandar out on dates. She always rejected his advances. She was happily in a relationship with 31-year-old Mark Mangakat. The pair even had a 3-year-old daughter and soon planned to move to Vegas. Despite his interest in his girlfriend, Kevin never actually had an argument or a disagreement with Mark. There were no warning signs for what was to come. On the 25th of April 2018, Mark went to the airport to pick his girlfriend up from work. Little did he know he was being followed. Kevin had hatched a murderous plan to stop his crush moving away with her boyfriend. Kevin and an alleged accomplice, Donovan Rivera, followed the pair home that day. As Mark was reversing his car into the garage, Kevin fired shots into the car. This killed Mark, and it is a miracle that no bullets hit Thandar. The killer fled the scene, and Thandar hadn't spotted that it was actually her work colleague. When investigators quizzed her about any potential enemies that Mark may have had, she mentioned Kevin almost as an afterthought. She said, "There is a fellow at work who has an interest in me, but he would never do that." A jury recently found Kevin guilty of murder and he will be sentenced in November. This teenager killed his ex-girlfriend for a free cooked breakfast. Back in 2010, 15-year-old Joshua Davis was in a relationship with Becca Aylward. The pair were the same age and they both went to Bridgend High School in Wales. Rebecca, who was known to her friends as Becca, had dreams of one day becoming a barrister. Upsettingly, throughout the relationship, the schoolboy had been aggressive and controlling with Becca. He'd even sent texts to his friends bragging that one day he might kill her. On one occasion, one of Joshua's friends replied saying that if he did so, he would buy him a cooked breakfast. Chillingly, Joshua would later say to his friend, "Don't say anything, but you may just owe me." In October 2010, despite the pair having broken up, Joshua told Rebecca he wanted to meet her at a local woods. Alarm bells rang for Rebecca's family when she failed to return home that day. No one knew that she had been lured to the woods by Joshua for him to kill her. He had beaten her to death with a rock. Her body was discovered the following day at 9 a.m. face down on the ground. The same day that Joshua had killed Rebecca, he sent texts to her phone to make it look like he was concerned about her. However, the truth did eventually emerge. Thankfully, Rebecca's parents knew that it was Joshua she was intending on meeting, so police investigated him. They confiscated his phone, and the evidence on the phone was enough to arrest him. Joshua and his friends tried to blame each other for the killing, but he was finally found guilty of the hideous crime. Shockingly, he only got 14 years in prison, and the 14 years is nearly up. Did you know that Gino D'Acampo actually served time in prison? Many people in the UK absolutely love Gino, who is well known for appearing on daytime television. However, many people don't know that he does have a criminal past. This true crime case honestly reads like a bizarre fan fiction. In 1998, way before he ever appeared on ITV's This Morning, Gino was 21 years old. He was an unknown waiter living in North London. He broke into the home of well-known 80s singer Paul Young. He was known for having hits such as Wherever I Lay My Hat. Gino stole Paul's guitar collection, which was reportedly worth around £4,000. He also stole his platinum disc. Police investigating the crime found that Gino had actually unknowingly left his DNA at the crime scene. He dropped a cigarette butt with his DNA on it. They were able to match this DNA to Gino, and he was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Gino actually reached out to Paul personally to apologise to him just prior to entering the I'm a Celebrity jungle back in 2009. Gino stated that he was involved with the wrong people back then and was on the wrong path. This girl killed her mum so that she wouldn't find out she got kicked out of school. On the 3rd of March 2020, police were called to do a welfare check at a property in Ohio. Brenda Powell lived in the house, the 50-year-old mother of Sydney Powell. Brenda had actually been on the phone with Sydney's former school. This was the University of Mount Union. Now, during the telephone call, a staff member heard repeated thuds and screaming, so authorities were alerted. Inside, they found Brenda Powell in a serious condition. She was rushed to hospital but died from her injuries. Brenda had been unaware that her 19-year-old daughter had been kicked out of the school. During her telephone conversation, Brenda was struck in the head and then stabbed nearly 30 times by Sydney. However, when police investigated the murder, Sydney tried to claim that there had been a break-in. She told them that there had been a noise and her mum had instructed her to run away. She said she heard screaming, and when she ran back in, her mum was on the floor. Investigators saw through her lies and she eventually changed her story. At her trial, she pled not guilty by reason of insanity. Her defence argued that Sydney was suffering from undiagnosed schizophrenia. They stated that she killed while experiencing a psychotic episode. However, it is rare for people with schizophrenia to act violently. It was concluded that Sydney had been exaggerating her symptoms. She's recently been found guilty and is awaiting sentencing. This woman murdered over her obsessive need to keep shopping. In February 1994, Dana Sue Gray was in financial trouble. She'd gradually been spending more and more, well beyond her means. When she lost her job, her finances only got worse. In a desperate attempt to feed her shopping addiction, she started to do the unthinkable. Her first victim is thought to be Norma Davis. She was 86 when she was killed. Dana was never actually convicted of committing this crime due to lack of evidence. Now, Norma was actually the mother-in-law of the woman who married Dana's dad. She knew Norma well, and on February the 16th, 94, Norma was found deceased by a neighbour. She'd been stabbed and there was no sign of forced entry. This led police to believe that the killer was probably somebody that Norma knew. She had likely willingly let the person into the house. And remember this part, the phone cord was unplugged. Now, 66-year-old June Roberts was found dead shortly after on February the 28th. Dana had gone round to her house to borrow a book off her, so June let her inside. Dana unplugged the phone from the wall and used the cord to strangle June. She then stole her credit cards and went on a shopping spree. A month later, on March the 16th, Dana took her next victim. 87-year-old Dora Beebe had just come home from the doctors when Dana arrived at her house. She asked her for some directions and she was let in. Once inside, she attacked her and killed her. Again, she stole credit cards to go on a shopping spree. She was eventually caught when she tried to kill Dorinda Hawkins. She again tried to use a telephone wire to kill her, but Dorinda, who had been left for dead, actually survived. She was then luckily able to provide police with a detailed description of what her attacker looked like. Dana was caught and found guilty and sentenced to life without parole. This man faked his own death to avoid child R charges. 41-year-old Melvin MD was due to appear in court the day he conveniently went missing back in August. He had apparently been out kayaking and his son reported he'd gone overboard. It was believed that he may have drowned in the Mississippi River 30 miles west of New Orleans. However, he's recently been found alive and has been arrested. It was obviously an immediate red flag to police when they were investigating the missing person and found that he was actually due in court on R charges. These were charges of indecent liberties with a child and statutory R of a child. They obviously didn't publicly state their suspicions as they didn't want to tip him off. Investigators soon learned that due to him being out on bail, he was actually wearing an ankle tag. This allowed detectives to find out locations that the man had stopped at. On the 17th of September, a vehicle in Georgia was stopped that didn't have a number plate. The driver actually tried to flee and then crashed the car and was taken into custody. After giving a fake name, he was fingerprinted and it was revealed that he was the supposedly deceased man. Melvin is currently being held in jail awaiting trial. Have you ever heard of the Sunderland Strangler? Stephen Greaveson is a lesser-known serial killer from Sunderland in the UK. He was active during the 1990s. Shockingly, he was known to lure young boys into abandoned buildings and kill them, and did so to 4 teenagers between 1990 and 94. In November 1993, he lured 18-year-old Thomas Kelly to an abandoned allotment shed. He killed him and then set him on fire. On the 4th of February the following year, he murdered 15-year-old David Hanson. Later that month, he would go on to lure 15-year-old David Grief to the same spot that he killed Thomas. Again, he killed him and set him on fire. All 3 boys attended Monk Wearmouth Academy. Now, Stephen was initially arrested in March and charged with attempted burglary at the house where he'd killed David Hanson. He was eventually charged in November 1995 with those 3 murders. He was given 35 years in prison. In November 2000, while in prison, he was arrested again. He was questioned over the 1990 murder of 14-year-old Simon Martin. Simon had been murdered in Gilside House in Roker. It took 12 years until he was eventually charged with this crime, and in 2013 he admitted being responsible. He was convicted of that murder in October 2013. This woman allegedly shot her husband when he asked for a divorce. Christina Pasqualetto from Arizona had apparently been trying to save her marriage. It may be a little bit more difficult now. On the 20th of September, the 62-year-old woman allegedly drove to the home that she shared with her estranged husband, John. She reportedly drove around about midnight and the pair got into an argument over their marriage. John told her that he wanted a divorce, whereas she did not. At this point, John said that he was in bed and Christina allegedly pulled out a weapon and shot him. The 80-year-old was able to defend himself and knock her down so that the gun fell out of her hand. He was luckily then able to flee round to the neighbour's house and get them to call the police. Police raced round and found John with a gunshot wound to his wrist. He was taken to a local hospital for treatment. Now, John alleges that he changed the locks of the house before the incident but had noticed items from the house going missing. John accuses Christina of forging a cheque from him for $10,000. She has admitted to forgery and theft. She has been charged for this and also for attempted first-degree murder and aggravated assault. This is the genius way that US Marshals tricked over 100 criminals into giving themselves up to police. It was a cold morning on December the 15th, 1985. Excited guests piled into Washington Convention Center, eager to collect their prizes. In the weeks prior, a genius plan was in motion. The US Marshals Service had come up with a sting to hopefully lure in criminals to one central location. The officers working on this ruse knew that they needed to do something big and exciting. They needed a way to trick criminals into their trap. They decided that NFL tickets were the ideal bait. They decided to send wanted criminals letters supposedly from a new sports TV channel called Flagship International Sports TV. They were told that their names had been randomly selected from Washington locals in order to get free tickets and transport to a football game. The invite also told them that they could collect their prizes at a pre-game party. There would be even more chances to win amazing prizes. One such prize was an amazing all-expenses-paid trip to a Super Bowl XX in New Orleans. However, when they showed up, all was not what it seemed. They eventually realised that the event was an elaborate ruse in order to capture over 100 criminals. Between them, they had warrants outstanding for 90 felonies and 70 misdemeanours. They were all placed under arrest, and the trick has gone down in history as one of the most successful and creative stings yet. This is the forgotten murder of 9/11. On the night of one of the most tragic historical events in history, Henryk Sywiak was shot dead. The 46-year-old had been on his way to a job interview in Brooklyn. His wife was still in Poland with his 2 children, and Henryk's TV was broken, so he was fairly unaware of the gravity of the situation in New York. His wife had tried to fill him in over the phone on what had actually gone on, but Henryk remained determined to go to the job interview that he'd planned. At the time of the killing, one ear witness heard people raising their voices and then heard gunshots. He was shot in the chest and stumbled out of a building onto the street where he passed away. Tragically, the father of 2, who was a Polish immigrant, is believed to have been a victim of a robbery gone wrong. However, due to the obvious chaos and huge devastation of 9/11, the murder seemed to be forgotten. He'd been living in the US for 11 months in Queens near his sister. He is remembered as having relentless spirit and being determined for success. 22 years later, his killing remains unsolved and authorities have never managed to identify any suspects. This is the terrifying murder case of Rosie Palmer from Hartlepool. It was the 30th of June 1994. 3-year-old Rosie had been at nursery that day and was outside playing when an ice cream van turned up. She got an ice cream from the van and seemed her usual happy self. The ice cream man watched as Rosie made her way back home, which was just walking distance from the van. However, 5:30 p.m. came and went and she was still not back home, and her parents started to get worried. Neighbours helped her stepdad look all around the neighbourhood for the little girl, but there was no luck. At 8:45 p.m. she was reported missing. Police scoured the local area, but there was no sign of Rosie. They went round some of the local houses and checked in the homes, but they couldn't see anything. Now, one neighbour on Frederick Street caught attention of police when his demeanour seemed to change. After initially being quite cooperative, Sean Armstrong started to act odd. So odd, in fact, that police decided to go back into his flat and have another look. This time, inside a bin bag in his cupboard, they found little Rosie. She was deceased and had been severely SA'd. Some of her clothing was found in another bag. The 32-year-old denied having any knowledge of how the little girl got there. He said that somebody else must have put her in his flat. Now, Sean was actually known in the area for being quite dodgy and inappropriate. Frustratingly, in 1993, a social worker had told police that Sean was a danger to children. He'd actually made prior threats about children and despite this was rehoused in an area full of families with young kids. Now, Sean would eventually admit to killing the little girl, but would only admit to manslaughter, not murder, due to his mental health issues. However, while in prison, Sean got a pen pal and started writing back and forth with a woman. He eventually admitted that he was fabricating his symptoms and did in fact murder Rosie. He had no idea that the woman he was speaking to was actually a crime reporter. She informed police, obviously, of his confession. He was given a 16-year minimum sentence and has been denied parole. He can reapply in 2025. Someone killed this little girl on her way to Disneyland. This terrifying case is unsolved and needs attention. It was December 1973. One family was heading to Disney World for a Christmas to remember. However, it would end up being unforgettable for the most tragic of reasons. 8-year-old Sherry Swally and her little brother were super excited for the trip. They were on their way to Florida with their dad from their home in Ohio. They ended up stopping off in Atlanta, Georgia, due to many petrol stations being closed. It was December the 23rd and they decided to stay with an old friend. The friend in question was Clyde Williamson and he was Sherry's dad's old work colleague. When they turned up, the 2 children began playing in the neighbourhood with the local kids. Neighbour Carolyn Ellis spotted Sherry playing. She told the little girl to go over to Clyde's house and ask everybody if they wanted to go round for tea there at about 8 p.m. This was the point where Sherry completely vanished. She was reported missing and tragically her body was found at 10:30 a.m. the next day. She was found about 40 yards away from the apartment complex and had been AR'd and stabbed to death. Shockingly, her body was lying in full view of hundreds of apartments. Still to this day, nobody has been convicted of this crime and Sherry's case remains unsolved. This is the terrifying Nottingham Halloween murder case. It was the eve of Halloween 1983. 16-year-old Colette Aram had been having a wholesome day with her mum. The pair had been baking cakes at their home in Keyworth. Between 7:50 and 8 p.m, Colette left the house to go to her boyfriend's. Now, despite it being quite dark out, she said it would only take her 10 minutes to walk and she would stay in a well-lit area. When her mum waved her off, she didn't realise she would never see Colette again. Colette's mum decided to ring Russell, her boyfriend, just to let her know that Colette was on the way. He actually decided to get on his bike so that he could meet Colette halfway and she would be safer. However, when he biked to try and meet her, he couldn't find her anywhere and it was as if she just vanished into thin air. Hearing the news that Colette had disappeared, her mum understandably panicked. Police were informed and they all began searching. Little did they know Colette had been abducted. She had been forced into a red Ford Fiesta and a neighbour heard a scream at about 8:10. She was tied up, arred and then killed. Her body was left in a field not far from her home. Shockingly, her murderer then popped into a local pub and began chatting with the barmaid. She noticed that he was acting weirdly and it almost appeared that he had blood on his hands. She was also aware that he was telling little lies throughout their conversation and kind of changing his story about who he was and why he was there. Colette's body was discovered the following day. The barmaid reported her strange interaction to the police and they were able to find a towel in the toilets of the pub. This had two people's DNA on, Colette and an unknown person. Unfortunately, when the unknown DNA was ran through the system, they didn't find any matches. Then a terrifying development. Police received a horrifying letter from the killer. It stated, "You'll never find me." The letter also mentioned that Halloween masks are common that time of year and therefore no one knows what he looks like. In June 1984, Colette's case was featured on the first ever episode of BBC's Crime Watch. Police got almost 400 calls about the case but didn't manage to track down the killer. The case began to go cold. 25 years later, there was an unexpected breakthrough. Police arrested 20-year-old Jean Paul Hutchinson. He had been driving and crashed into a parked car. When his DNA was collected, it was almost a perfect match to Colette's killer's DNA. Now, obviously he was 20, so at the time of her killing, he wasn't even alive. So how on earth was he related to the killer? His dad was Paul Hutchinson, who was now 50 years old. Shockingly, when police questioned him, he tried to blame his deceased brother. Police managed to get their hands on his brother's DNA and tested it, and it was not a match. Paul did eventually plead guilty and was given life. He was found deceased in his cell shortly into his sentence. A woman was decapitated and hidden in a suitcase by the last person anyone expected. This is one of the most gruesome UK crime cases I've heard in a long time. Deborah Chong was a devout Christian. She was a kind and sweet-natured woman. She warmed to Gemma Mitchell when the pair met through their local church in North London. Gemma was also a spiritual person who seemed to have good family values, and she lived with her mum and sister. Unfortunately, Deborah suffered with her mental health, and as their friendship grew, Deborah felt like she could trust Gemma. Gemma gave her support and even offered her services as an osteopath. When Gemma was struggling to afford refurbishments on her family home, Deborah actually kindly offered to lend £200,000 to help out. However, what started off as a kind gesture would prove to be fatal. Deborah understandably had second thoughts about lending such a large amount of money. After informing Gemma that she'd changed her mind, she would go on to suffer a hideous death at the hands of her supposed friend. After killing Deborah, Gemma put her decapitated body in a suitcase. She then drove to Devon to hide the suitcase in the woods. Body in the Suitcase, The Murder of Deborah Chong is out now on Crime and Investigation Play. The two-part series explores this hideous case, including fascinating interviews with Gemma's mum, Hilary. She still maintains her daughter's innocence to this day. Investigators explore this fascinating crime and examine the court case in this eye-opening documentary. UK viewers can use my code Charlie50 via the Crime and Investigation Play website to get 50% off. The app is ad-free, it works on all devices, and you can download documentaries to watch anytime on the go. Now, the 50% off offer applies to all sign-up options. The best offer is the yearly membership, which works out at less than 30p a week. To enter the code, click on the link in my bio and sign up via the website. Once you've registered and used the code, you can then download the app to your device and start watching. This woman was killed at SeaWorld while performing with a killer whale. Dawn Brancho worked at SeaWorld in Florida for years. People regularly flocked to the park to watch the orcas perform alongside their trainers. Dawn had been inspired to get into this line of work after visiting SeaWorld at just 10 years old. She fell in love with the animals and the idea of getting close to and working with them. However, on February the 24th, 2010, SeaWorld changed forever. If you've seen the documentary Blackfish, you will understand just how awfully these wild animals are treated at these inhumane parks. Dawn's death would highlight this to the world. Dawn was frequently paired with orcas and would perform stunts to the astonished crowd. She developed a close bond with the now infamous orca called Tilikum. On the day in question, the pair were performing their live killer whale show. Stunned witnesses gasped as they watched Tilikum grab Dawn by her ponytail. He pulled her underwater and began swinging her viciously. Quickly, she began to drown. Tilikum thrashed around so violently that, and please turn off now if you are squeamish, Dawn's jaw broke, her arm was dislocated, and her vertebrae and ribs were snapped. Her scalp was also completely removed from her head. No SeaWorld trainer ever again entered the pool with orcas. Now, Tilikum was known to be involved in the death of trainer Kelty Byrne in 1991. I did a video about that, so you'll find it in this playlist. He was also involved in the death of Daniel Jukes in 1999. Let me know if you'd like to see a video on that. Tilikum passed away in 2017. This fast food employee allegedly shot at a customer over curly fries. A Jack in the Box employee from Houston allegedly shot a customer in an argument at a drive-thru, according to a lawsuit. The dispute appears to have started over curly fries. It's reported that there is a 23-minute video of the fight which took place on March the 3rd, 2021. The incident involved a man, his pregnant wife, and their 6-year-old daughter. They had ordered 2 combo meals at the Jack in the Box near Houston Airport. When they received their order, they told the lady at the window that their curly fries were missing. This then apparently escalated into an argument. The man had requested the manager, at which point it's alleged that the employee, Alonia Ford, started launching ice and ketchup packets at the family. She then apparently walked away from the window and returned with a gun. She's accused of firing shots into the family truck, which quickly sped away. The family then called the police. Now, the employee in question was known to have a prior criminal record from 2012, and some believe that Jack in the Box didn't do enough to background check their employee. Alania was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of deadly conduct. She got sentenced to 1 year of deferred adjudication, which is basically like probation. Police have arrested a Chucky doll for threatening members of the public with a knife. This month, police in Mexico arrested a doll. Terrifyingly, they had been made aware of a Chucky doll who, along with its owner, were threatening the public in Monclova. If you're not already aware, the doll comes from the 1988 film Child's Play. In the movie, the serial killer turns into the doll, which then begins a terrifying crime spree. The owner of the doll has only been identified as Carlos N. He was reportedly scaring the public with the doll, threatening them with a knife and demanding money off them. Both Carlos and the doll were charged with disturbing the peace and putting others' integrity at risk. The doll was handcuffed and taken to the police station. They both had mugshots taken, and there has been some controversy over whether or not the officers were taking their job seriously. The police officer who put cuffs onto the Chucky doll has been reprimanded. This man sent absolutely chilling text messages after his wife was murdered. 31-year-old John Wonder, who lives in Missouri, has been arrested. On the 22nd of September 2023, his boss at work was concerned. Both John and his wife worked for the same company, but on the day in question, neither of them showed up for work. The pair's supervisor ended up calling police to do a welfare check on the couple, and what police found was horrifying. John's wife Ashley was deceased. She was found next to a knife and cleaver in her laundry room. Hauntingly, she had John's last name written on her leg in blood. She also had a belt round her neck. The pair had apparently been going through divorce proceedings. It's reported that they have 2 children aged 2 and 4. After the murder, John's friend and sister both received disturbing text messages from him. One stated, "For the record, it's way easier and much more satisfying than you can imagine. See you around." He has been charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. His bond is set at $1 million. Ashley's distraught mum is looking after the children at present. A woman from Georgia was murdered 33 years ago. She was never reported missing. Now the mystery of her identity is finally solved. A woman's body was discovered in 1990. Police at the time believed that the 20-year-old victim was strangled, but bizarrely the woman was never reported missing by any family or friends. She was found by a road crew alongside Interstate 40 near the New Hope Church Road exit. This was around 35 miles away from Durham. The case plagued investigators for decades. One sheriff stated, "Throughout the decades, some of our finest investigators kept plugging away. They finally know the woman's identity. Her name is Lisa Coburn Kessler. She was a resident of Jackson County." Now, it is reported that her family didn't actually know she was missing at the time that she vanished. They state that she left Georgia of her own accord to go to Michigan. It's believed that when she then left Michigan, she was going to return to Georgia. In 2018, new technology enabled investigators to create this digital illustration of the woman. It was intended to hopefully spark interest with the members of the public so that somebody would come forward and identify her. However, unfortunately, there was no luck. In 2020, forensics enabled a hair fragment to be used for DNA extraction. Luckily, they were able to link a paternal cousin of the victim using genealogy databases. Whilst it's still a mystery who killed Lisa and why, investigators are closer than ever to figuring it out. They're now hoping that the DNA analysis can help to identify the killer. There has been a huge breakthrough in the case of this missing mother of 5. On the 3rd of July 2015, Crystal Rogers vanished. Her boyfriend Brooks Hook told investigators that the pair had gone to sleep together at his family farm in Kentucky. When he woke up, he states that the mother of 5 had vanished. Months later, Brooks was named as the prime suspect. Interestingly, his brother Nick was fired from the police for interfering with the investigation. Terrifyingly, a year after the disappearance, tragedy struck again. At this point, it was November 2016. Crystal's dad, Tommy Ballard, was shot and killed while hunting with his son and grandson. He had been shot in the chest from behind. He'd been a huge part of the search for Crystal, and he just wouldn't rest until she was found. Tommy's case remains unsolved. Now, Crystal has been missing for 8 years, and although her body has not been found, police state that she is presumed dead. Now, Brooks has been arrested in connection with the case. The now 41-year-old faces charges of murder and tampering with physical evidence. He is being held on a $10 million bond. On the 7th of September, another arrest was made of 32-year-old Joseph Lawson. Joseph is charged with conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with physical evidence. Jurors on this case were so haunted by the crime that they needed trauma therapy. In March 2018, 38-year-old Veronica Youngblood from Virginia was arrested. On the night in question, she had given her daughters gummies laced with a sleeping aid. Her daughters were 5-year-old Brooklyn and 15-year-old Sharon. The mother of 2 then shot both of her daughters. Horrifically, Sharon did not instantly die. She was actually able to ring police and explain to them that her mum had shot them both. When jurors on the case were played this 911 call, they were so distressed that they actually needed therapy. The teenager was taken to hospital where she sadly passed away. It transpired that Veronica had called her ex-husband after the killings and told him that she hated him. She also told him what she'd done. It's believed that her motive for this hideous crime was revenge over him. He'd actually been planning to move away to Missouri with Brooklyn the following weekend. Following her trial, Veronica was sentenced to 78 years in prison.
What if it happened to you on a different day, on a bridge where there wasn't a rail in the way, or a neighborhood street?
This true crime case is extremely distressing, so please be warned before watching. Devin Michaels, a 45-year-old woman from Nevada, has been charged with murder. This came a week after 47-year-old Jonathan Willett was found deceased in a home without his head. It was actually Jonathan's mother who had discovered him lying on a bed next to bottles of ammonia and bleach. His mum also discovered that a meat cleaver from the house was missing. Distressingly, Jonathan was actually the father of Devin's children. He owned a moving company in Las Vegas and was known to locals as the Vegas moving guy. Devin states that the day in question, Jonathan had been abusive to her. He had allegedly tried to SA her and she hit him with a stick. She insists that she didn't intend to kill him but to injure him and get him out of the way. She reports that she wanted to get rid of him for a while she figured out what to do with the children. She said she had hoped that he was just injured enough to go to the hospital. Jonathan's actual cause of death is still currently unknown, but it is alleged that Devin threw Jonathan's head in the rubbish and this was likely taken away by the bin men. Mystery surrounds this new incredibly disturbing true crime case. On the 25th of September, housekeeping staff at the Marriott Hotel in Philadelphia Airport made a horrific discovery. An American Airlines flight attendant had been found dead in the room. All we know at this stage is the woman is 66 years old and her name is Diana Ramos. Mysteriously, she was found deceased with a sock in her mouth at 10:45 p.m. on the day in question. The hotel directly connects to the Philadelphia International Airport and the victim had been due to check out 2 days prior. It's believed that there was no signs of forced entry or a struggle. Investigators are obviously treating this death as suspicious. The actual cause of death has not yet been released. Investigators have told the press that they found sealed bottles of prescription medication in the woman's room. One flight attendant stated, "Everybody is still trying to figure out what happened and why her crew just left her." It's believed that her crew was LA based. Obviously in this case there remains an awful lot of unanswered questions. This man murdered his ex-girlfriend by throwing her off a balcony. It was Valentine's Day 2020. Well-known Hollywood therapist Dr. Amy Harwick was letting her hair down with friends at a burlesque show. When the evening was over, she headed back to her Hollywood Hills home. However, the 38-year-old had no idea of the horror that awaited her. Amy was hugely successful and widely known. She was also once engaged to famous comedian Drew Carey, and she was used to being in the public eye. However, her life was far from picture perfect. After splitting with her ex-boyfriend Gareth Pursehouse, she'd been forced to take out 2 restraining orders due to his behaviour. She had once written in an email that he was obsessive and scary. When she returned home on the night in question at around 1 a.m, the now 45-year-old was waiting for her. Terrifyingly, Gareth strangled her in her 3rd floor bedroom. It's believed that when Gareth heard Amy's roommate screaming to try and get help, he then threw her 20 feet over the balcony. Amy landed on the patio and police officers and ambulance raced to the scene. She was rushed to hospital but tragically died 2 hours later. Gareth's DNA was all over the crime scene and clearly Amy had previously expressed concerns over his behaviour. He has now been found guilty of her murder and is facing a life sentence.